The wedding day was everything she had imagined it would be. Family members filled the venue with laughter, warm embraces, and joyful tears. Phones were lifted into the air, capturing smiles, dancing, and the glow of a bride who believed she was stepping into the safest chapter of her life. Dressed in white, she radiated happiness and hope. Her groom stood beside her, calm and composed, exchanging vows that promised love, protection, and forever. To everyone watching, it was a perfect union, a celebration of commitment, a beginning. No one knew that the same night meant to seal a lifetime of love would become the final night of her life. As the ceremony ended, guests hugged the couple and slowly drifted away, leaving the newlyweds to begin their first hours as husband and wife. The joy of the celebration lingered as they returned home. It should have been the start of their honeymoon, a quiet, intimate moment where excitement settled into contentment. Instead, it became a setting for a crime so brutal it stunned an entire community. According to investigators, tensions rose shortly after the couple arrived home. What began as a disagreement escalated behind closed doors. The details of the argument remain unclear, but what followed was an eruption of violence that no one could have anticipated. In a moment that defies comprehension, the husband turned on his bride. Authorities say he attacked her, dousing her with a flammable substance and setting her on fire. The woman who had walked down the aisle just hours earlier, surrounded by applause and love, was suddenly trapped in unimaginable pain inside the place she believed would be her refuge. Her screams pierced the night. Neighbors later reported hearing desperate cries for help and smelling smoke. Panic spread as emergency calls flooded in. Firefighters and paramedics rushed to the scene, unprepared for the horror they were about to encounter. Inside the home, they found the young bride critically injured, her burns extensive and life-threatening. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors worked relentlessly, fighting against overwhelming odds. Burns covered much of her body, triggering severe trauma and organ failure. Despite every medical effort, the injuries were too severe. Within hours of celebrating her marriage, the bride succumbed to her wounds. A life filled with plans, dreams, and promise was extinguished in a single night. As news of the tragedy spread, shock rippled through the city. Friends and family struggled to make sense of what had happened. The same people who had celebrated a wedding were now grappling with grief, disbelief, and anger. Wedding photos began circulating online, smiling faces frozen in time, now haunting reminders of how quickly joy had turned into horror. How could a man who had just pledged love commit such an act of cruelty? Police moved quickly. The husband was arrested and charged with murder. During questioning, investigators described him as detached and unemotional, offering little explanation for his actions. Nothing he said could justify the violence that had taken a life. As detectives began piecing together the couple's history, troubling details emerged. Some people close to them later admitted that the relationship had not been as perfect as it appeared. There had been arguments, controlling tendencies, and moments of tension that were easy to dismiss at the time. Like many cases of domestic abuse, warning signs existed, but they were overshadowed by hope, love, and the belief that marriage would change everything. Experts say this belief is tragically common. For some abusers, marriage does not symbolize partnership or unity. Instead, it represents control. The wedding ring becomes a symbol of ownership rather than commitment. Major life events, such as marriage, can intensify underlying issues of dominance, entitlement, and rage. Studies show that domestic violence often escalates after milestones like weddings, pregnancies, or financial stress. This case reflected that pattern in the most devastating way possible. In court, prosecutors laid out the timeline with chilling clarity. A joyful wedding, a private argument, and a deliberate act of violence that left no chance for survival. The evidence showed that this was not an accident, not a misunderstanding, and not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was an intentional act with irreversible consequences. The husband now faces the full weight of the justice system. Yet no sentence can undo the damage. No verdict can restore the life that was taken or heal the wounds left behind. For the victim's family, grief came in layers. They had attended a wedding expecting to celebrate a new beginning, and instead were forced to plan a funeral. The dress she wore on her wedding day became a painful symbol, not of joy, but of loss. Every memory of that celebration now carries the shadow of what followed. The community mourned alongside them. Vigils were held. Candles were lit. Strangers left flowers, notes, and messages of sympathy. Her story resonated far beyond her immediate circle, not just because of the brutality of the crime, but because it exposed a reality many prefer not to confront, that danger can exist even in moments meant to represent love and safety. The tragedy reignited urgent conversations about domestic violence and the signs that often go unnoticed. Advocates emphasized that abuse does not always begin with physical harm. It often starts quietly, with emotional manipulation, isolation, jealousy, and control. By the time violence becomes visible, the situation may already be critical. Her death became a painful reminder that love should never be measured by fear, and commitment should never require silence or endurance of harm. It challenged communities to look beyond appearances and to listen when concerns are raised, even when everything seems perfect on the surface. A wedding is meant to symbolize hope, unity, and the promise of tomorrow. For this woman, it became the final chapter of her life. Her story now stands not only as a true crime case, but as a warning, one written in tragedy and loss. It urges awareness, it demands vigilance, and it reminds us of a truth that should never be ignored. Real love does not control, destroy, or take a life. What began with the words, "I do," ended in silence. And while justice may be pursued in a courtroom, the absence she leaves behind will be felt forever.